lecture is on final and consecutive clauses. I'm currently partial to calling these final and consecutive, but your textbook uses different terminology. Your textbook will talk about purpose and object. In fact, it's really focused on using the term object clauses. And sometimes I'll just say result clause because it's actually shorter than saying consecutive clause. But these are kind of two comprehensive current terms. So put those terms there and sort of equivalents in parentheses there. And then I'm going to review indirect speech, or more properly speaking, indirect discourse, indirect statement, which includes indirect questions. You had that back in week 11 of 101. But it's good to review it because you've run into some hookies lately. Hookie introduces this, right? That something is the case. And because as indirect discourse becomes more complicated, you're going to find yourself having to use other moods of the verb. So I'm going to introduce this concept to you. Just refresh you with the basics and then go through some of the remainder. All right, so purpose and object clauses, or final clauses. Final clauses doesn't mean that they're final in a sentence. Maybe that's one reason I should avoid using the term, right? Because someone's bound to get confused. Like, that's not the final clause. It's the beginning of the sentence. That's not what it means. It has the sense of finality, right? So it's what you intend, where you intend to end up, your purpose, or what the object is of whatever your intentions are, your thoughts are, your fears are, right? Some sort of mental activity. That's final in that sense. It's your goal, it's your end, right? It's your object. And they express, as I started to say already, goals, motives, purposes. And in English, they start very often with that in order to so that. Negatives often lest, although we don't use it terribly much in spoken modern English in the States, but that would be an example certainly in writing. You might say lest rather than simply that or that not. And some other ways of expressing this perhaps in English. In Greek, you can express them with a complementary infinitive, although this doesn't emphasize the intent, right? So with this final clauses, when you're talking about purposes or objects of mind in particular, what your attitude is towards some end goal or some object, it's not emphasized by these complementary use of infinitives. So, I'll give you an example: erketai edein tuto, right? He, she came literally to see this, but it doesn't suggest that there's, as I said, any cause or consequence between the two. And it's not you won't see it in writing. In context, you might be able to figure it out, right? Came and they saw this, right? And in fact, a really common use of a complementary infinitive, which does express intent, is one that you had introduced to you at the very end of 101, and that is this verb melo, right? Which means I intend to or I'm going to do something. And it's a good translation of actually the common usage of I'm going to in English. Because I'm going to is actually a somewhat more intentional expression of the future. Right? When we say something like I shall or I will, whatever the etymologies are actually of those words, will does literally suggest that you wish something. In modern parlance, because we're not really thinking etymologically most of the time, we think I will be there. But that, depending on the context, could suggest that I will be there because I intend to be there, or I will be there because who knows? Chances are I'll be there, either because I intended to be there or because I saw a bright light in the sky, blacked out, woke up, and there I was there. Whereas I'm going to expresses intent. I'm going there to do it. So melo, and very often with the future infinitive. Future infinitive does not have a good translation in English, unfortunately. So you just have to render it as a present infinitive usually in English. The closest you can sort of do in English to say something like to be about to do something, right? We have to really talk around the future infinitive in English. So I am going to do these things, right? So now, true final clauses, in other words, where you're expressing the intent, are preceded in Attic Greek by hymna. And I've underscored that one because that's the one you've been introduced to. Although if I hand you some other writings from other textbooks, you will see some other uses, like the use of hos or hopos in this way. So this hina is what, since there are several people in here who either know modern Greek or will be expressing themselves in modern Greek soon, gives us na in modern Greek, which is indispensable for expressing any sort of subordinate clause in Greek today. And the negative of this is may, particularly after verbs of fear or caution in object clauses. Now, that would be all well and good if it were just that way. And that you're like, cool, I just know some new particle or adverb or something introduces this. Except here is where Greek gets complicated. Because when the verb in the main clause, not the one that's subordinated by one of these, right, is in one of the primary tenses. The primary tenses are the present, the future, and the perfect. You know two of those. These are the ones that take the primary endings. The perfect is its own set of endings. These are the primary tenses. The subordinate verb is in the subjunctive. And that's the rule that fact is borne out in modern Greek. It's just that you can't distinguish either graphically or in pronunciation these days between subjunctive and non-subjunctive in most instances. Or certainly not a present subjunctive. You can't distinguish the aorist subjunctives. So, that's checkmark. That's the one thing you want to know right now. Is that if you're expressing purpose, one of these verb tenses, and we'll stick these verb tenses right now, the primary, then the subordinate verb, right, the one that expresses the purpose, is going to be in the subjunctive mood. Now, with the complete rule here, and that is that if it's in one of your secondary tenses, the aorist, the imperfect, or the pluperfect, then your subordinate verb is going to be the optative. You've not learned the optative yet, but you will in a few weeks for the semester itself. These are called secondary tenses that take secondary endings. Pluperfect actually takes straight up secondary endings. They're sometimes called historical tenses. And there is an extremely rarely used future perfect in Greek. And it counts as a primary. But I just don't even deal with it in most instances. You're not, the chances of you seeing a future perfect anytime soon is infinitesimally small. All right, so here's some examples. That always helps, doesn't it? So here's essentially the same sentence that we had before, but with a clear expression of intent. Erketai hina tuto idei. He, she, it came, sort of, kind of, literally, in the sense that I'm trying to express the subjunctive with an auxiliary verb in English, that he, she, it may see this, right? Because you can sometimes try translate your subjunctive says may or might in the past tense, right? Suggesting that there's a possibility that this will happen, but you're talking hypothetically, right? That's the idea. And the word may, and its past tense might in English, are related to the word might, as in force, right? It's do not con, it's possible. And that's what you're expressing. That it may be possible, it is possible that they will see this. So these purposes are expressing the possibility, right? Because they've done this, then it is possible for them to do something else. That's their purpose. And that's frankly why the subjunctive is used in these situations. Notice this is a subjunctive, And subjunctive, which is, well, what sort of subjunctive is it? Maybe we can do a quick quiz. In other words, with respect to tense, loosely speaking, what kind of subjunctive is it? Mikhail? A couple of ways of approaching this. You can do it by process of elimination. Yeah. Aorist. What would you say aorist?
The English translation of it.
Right. Well, okay. Could be, but I hadn't written to be seeing this, which would be really clearly present continuous. But it doesn't imply seeing it once. It was just kind of ambiguous about this, though, the way the Greek isn't.
But you're not.
Right. But how about formally speaking? Samantha, what makes that an aorist subjunctive as opposed to a present subjunctive, just in terms of the shape of the word?
Third principal part.
Third principal part, right? It's from Adorn. Now notice what's happened. Third principal part is the aorist part. If I want to make it a present subjunctive, I would use the first principal part, right? And then this would be oro. Like you can't make people any longer than already is, right? I came to see, to be seeing something, right? Oro. But the same is true, by the way, just really quickly to aside to you, which you may prick up your ears to, although it's a little advanced at this point in modern Greek for you. It is the same, of course, in modern Greek between ήρθα, παρέχομαι, να βλέπω, and έρχομαι να δω.
Okay. Yes.
Right? Yeah. So βλέπω means I came to be seeing stuff. Ήρθα να δω, I came to see right now. Yeah. So, aorist subjunctive, notice it's missing temporal outlet. A really important point to remember. The indicative takes the temporal argument because it has an expression of time, concrete time, in real circumstances. Or, sort of a little bit more colloquially, he should have came to see. In other words, in order, right, to see, so that they could do it, to see this. So note the use of the subjunctive. An example I pulled out of Xenophon's Analysis, because it's just silly, right? So, but I also pulled it out because it involves words that people seem to be stumbling over all the time. Dote moi, it seems right to me, or befitting to me, right? It seems right to me, or somebody seems to me, to burn thoroughly, right? Burn up. Katekausai, you've had this verb, you may remember, kaio, to burn. Tas hamaxas, you've actually had this word, you may remember, cart or a wagon. Hina me, there's a negative. Ta yuge, the pairs, but meaning pairs of oxen in this context. Notice that would be to jugos, pair, heimon, right? So that our pairs of oxen do not become our strategoi, do not become our generals. Literally, it's just a verb made from strategos, strategeo, right? Stratego. So that is good impersonal verb, doke moi, it seems right to me. And a silly sentence, somewhat cheap before. Something sort of more close to what you've been reading. Kaleton, yeah, ton hopos. I used hopos here deliberately, because you will see this. You'll see hos also, especially in Xenophon if it happens, right? To introduce this rather than hina, so just give you another example. Hopos me apotane hopilipos. Call the doctor so that Philip doesn't die. Right? Notice that this is an aorist subjunctive again. Because he's not going to die. It's not so that he won't be dying. Right? Or die repeatedly or something. Or just dies once. That's why it's going to be aorist. Punctual action. So he doesn't die. That's going to be done. So that happens. That's why preferentially use the aorist here. Otherwise, you'd be suggesting that it was a long, continuous process, and it might be. Notice this is imperative, recessive accent, right? Kale. All right. Now, those are pretty much straightforward purpose versions of the final. Object clauses are just sort of a subcategory, and they have to do more with sort of aiming at striving for, caring about or trying to effect, in other words, to bring something about. And they are very frequently with hopos, so this is distinct from hina. So again, this is an imperative scope, a hopos tutu genesetai. And I deliberately used a middle form here, just to call attention to the fact that, if this is, as it is, a future middle here, you have a lengthening of the thematic vowel, genesetai, tuto. Look into this, right, scopeo, to investigate, look into, that this may happen. Make sure that this happens. Again, use the subjunctive. Pratikai hopos may, giving you a negative here, peremenes, notice the lengthening of the thematic vowel, ton iatron. Right, it is being done, it's, right, being carried out, faring, right, so that you don't have to wait for the doctor. So you use may with your finite forms here. Clauses of fearing don't have this conjunction. They don't have a hina or a hopos or a hos in them. But they really fall into the same broad category of object clauses. And because they've recently introduced these to you in your text, I'm going to insert them here. In fact, they introduced them to you with the introduction to the subjunctive. And I made mention of them in the last PowerPoint. So, phobumai me tuto genetai. Again, notice the lengthening of the thematic vowel. Lengthening is important, right? The Greek doubles down on it, and Attic Greek doubles down on the thematic vowel, even when it doesn't need to, right? With its non-thematic, when it's developed from a non-thematic present. But the rules concerning the alternation between e-o, or lengthened a and o, have not changed. So the pattern is always going to be, there's going to be an o sound in the first singular for the H sub 2 reason, right? But it's going to be o also whenever the following letter is a m or a n, a resonant. Otherwise, in all other positions, it's going to have an e quality, if you will, an a or an a, right, eta quality to it. So don't make it suddenly o through the entire paradigm. Right? It's still going to be o, a, o, as in the present tense, as in the present indicative. So I fear that this may happen, or I fear lest this happen, right? Present subjunctive, I used this rather, admittedly, sort of stilted way of expressing it in English. I know most people would say that in common parlance, casual conversation around the university campus these days. But I did so with less because that allows me to use a present subjunctive in English, right? I fear lest this happen. Present subjunctive in English is subtle in most cases, but one of the things it does is it drops the S from the third singular. That's one way you can recognize it. Otherwise, this happens in the indicative, wouldn't it? And elsewhere in English, it's sometimes just a suppletive form. If I say, I suggest that you be there, I'm using a present subjunctive. It's be in the present subjunctive in English. Be that as it may. Maybe that way, maybe another way. That's why we say be that as it may. We don't so often use the present subjunctive in English with conditional statements involving the word if. Be that as it may does introduce a conditional. But you still see it in writing. Some people who are very proper about their English will say things like, if that be the case, which expresses uncertainty. about the possibility. Whereas if that is the case, suggests that you're pretty certain about it. And if that were the case, which is an imperfect subjunctive in English, it suggests that you're actually talking about something contrary to fact or a pure hypothetical to your own mind. If that were the case, meaning it isn't for sure, we're certain of that. If it be the case, maybe, we're not sure. If it is the case, we're pretty certain that's the case. Right? So those are some uses of the subjunctive in English. Or the indicative in English, in the case of is, where you're pretty certain about the statement you're making. Alright, so från det som mig kraftstånd moi sigan, right? I worry that it may be best. Now this is an impersonal it is, but it's in the subjunctive. Right? To be quiet. Negative ku. Povume me u tutogenitai. I fear that this may not happen. So notice that you're, with the fearing clauses, you're using may already to express that I don't want it to be the case, right? May it not be the case, but if you have to use a negative, right? I fear that this will not happen, then that not happening has to be expressed with a separate ooh. It's a little odd. It looks like a double negative, doesn't it? Right? But this is why it's a subcategory. So, negative with ooh. For whom I may ooh tutogenitai. I fear that this will not happen, or this may not happen. And from this old may ooh kratiston moi sigar. I fear that it may be best for me not to be quiet. Yeah.
So the may is there because there's the fearing.
Because of the fearing, that's right.
And then you have to add the negative.
And you have to add the ooh to make a negative if the thing that you fear is not going to happen, or may not happen. No pun intended, may not happen, or may not happen. Now, this is weird. The fearing clauses always have this may in them. I think of it as a sort of a special usage of may in the sense of like a prohibitive use, like what you're saying in ancient Greek is I worry, right, that may this not happen, right? The thing that you fear is the thing that you're actually saying, right? Let it not happen. Does that kind of make sense? The fearing clauses are a little odd. They always have the may in them because that expresses the thing that's feared. But if the thing that feared is a non-existent thing, right? The thing that may not transpire, then you use ooh to express that. All right, so that is the main thing I wanted to touch on today. Main takeaways. Hina plus subjunctive expresses some sort of finality, especially purpose. Its negative is with may. Object clauses are similar, sometimes with hina, sometimes with purpose, right? Give you some purpose examples. They also are followed by subjunctive forms. In general, final clauses are primary verb, right? I want something, I'm thinking about something, I'm looking into something, I care about something, I hope it is something, right? I expect something, and the subordinate verb that goes in the subjunctive. And then fearing clauses are a kind of object, but an object concerning fear or caution. Fear, expressed by, obviously, bohumai, and frondenso suggests caution, right? I am worried that I'm concerned about something. But they generally lumped into a general category called fearing clauses. Any questions about that? No? The subjunctive forms of a, me are really weird looking.
Yep.
And why are they really weird looking? Because they suddenly become thematic. And they behave like thematic, right? They behave like pre-thematic presence. So rather than going from a, me it goes to O, always A, and so forth, as if for a theme. But that's because the subjunctive is always thematic. I'll decide tomorrow what part of this I'm going to quiz you on. It's not going to be all of it for sure. Purpose clause for sure will be in there somewhere. And consecutive clauses, which are easy. Right? So consecutive clauses and result clauses you had, but keep running into them. A few people were stumbling over them. So here's my little spiel on consecutive clauses. Right? You've already been introduced to these. They express the actual consequence, result, or outcome of motive, intention, and purpose. So they're kind of related, right? And they share a kind of similar conjunction or sets of conjunctions. So in English, we often translate these as that, so that, with the result that. Although that's just wordy, right? We don't always have to say that. We can say that. Right? Not tuto, but, well, as it happens, hoste. So, they're preceded by hoste. As I said, some authors use hos, and it'll make sense semantically, and the way I'll explain in a moment, followed by the infinitive or a finite form of the verb. So you had this first when Pappy was, I think, on the Acropolis, and he did something like he did something with the result that he got angry or grumpy or something of the sort. Hoste, and it gave you the result. He got tired, I think.
He didn't want to walk over.
He didn't want to walk, with the result that he got pissy. All right, so some examples. So, hutos anoitos notice that's an enclitic A, you are. Anoitos hoste elpidzes autos Christus genestestai. It's a future infinitive, right? Are you so anoitos, like Santias, are you so lacking in nous in mind? Are you so foolish that you expect them to become useful? Right? Right? In the future, with the result in the future, hence genestai, till they become useful. Or huto de takeos treke holagos hoste dioligu unaton esten oran auton. And that's actually more or less lifted from your text. That was in one example we gave you, hoste. The hare ran so quickly that in a little while, or if you want to be really wordy about it, with the result that, right? In a little while, it was impossible to see it. I think it's helpful when you run into this and try to identify it's one of your little words, to think of it as simply hos plus enclitic te, and so, which kind of expresses result in English, right? You could translate this in a way that would be understood by many people as, right, and the hare ran so quickly, and so, right, as a consequence, in a little bit, soon, it was impossible to see it. The negative uses me before an infinitive, and u before a finite form of the verb. And that's actually a very good rule in general. If you want to express a negative infinitive, use me. So not being, may anai.
Does that relate to fear being infinitive in fear clauses? Just as a general idea?
Yeah,
Not the actual verb itself, but as a general idea that fearing something.
no, it has to do with has more to do with the fact that may accompanies the subjunctive and non-finite forms of the verb. And the semantics, it's a good question. The semantics are a little unclear, but it's just a rule. I would call it a fairly arbitrary rule you have to remember in Greek. It's good to think of oo and its various forms as accompanying the indicative. You'll see oo also with the optative. We don't know, part of the problem is we don't really know what the etymology of oo is. It may actually be derived from an inflection, the obrate of the same word that we have had before, I, ever. you have this word, which is just the word eon in English. So it may be considered only appropriate to definitive statements like not ever the case originally. Whereas the may appears to be a linking graded ma, which means but. So it may express indefiniteness of some sort. That would certainly explain why oo accompanies the indicative. But again, that's conjecture. So, are you so wise that you do not expect them to become useful? Right? The hair ran so slowly with the result that it was impossible not to see it. In other words, it was still right there. So may plus spot on, right, to see. Makes some sense? I mean, it's a lot to remember, but you following the logic, but the oo may thing is kind of arbitrary. Indirect speech, a couple of quick notes. Right, so you've had this before. Indirect speech, reported speech, statement, or discourse. Since we're not always talking about speech, we're talking about writing, that's a little bit pedantic, but indirect speech for all intents and purposes. Already introduced to you back in week 11. But, general principles. Indirect speech in ancient Greek means reporting the words, thoughts, and intentions of another person or of oneself objectively. Indirect quotations and prose are preceded by hoti, and I've emphasized here, underline the form that you've seen, but also hos. Hos is such an all-purpose word, right? It has when, so, with the result that, in order to, and even in this case, that, in the sense of indirect speech, that. Which may be translated as that in English, although we can omit it in English, right? If it's clear that we're reporting somebody else's speech. The verb of the reported speech may be finite, or an infinitive, or a participle. Indirect questions basically follow the same principles as indirect statements, right? He asked, what are we to do, right? So, you've introduced a hoti so far. And you can say something like, Epon hoti hikanoiasmen. He said, we are capable. Or we were capable. Notice that we can omit the that, the hoti equivalent, in English without ambiguity in this case. He said, we are capable. Notice that Greek doesn't care about your tense agreement. It cares more about things like aspect agreement. So esmen is in the present, while apon is in the aorist indicative. Now, frankly, it makes sense to Greeks because you didn't cease to be. You're going to continue to say to be capable. It's always imperfective. Use for the infinitive, right? So we've had evangelitai tad poiesin. He promises that he will do what is right, literally the right things. Use for the participle, and this is just review. Usually involving verbs of seeing, hearing, perceiving, knowing, and there is cognitive activity or cogitation. So, engele tutos anthropos epomenos, he announced these persons were coming, literally these persons coming. He announced persons in participial use of coming. Alright, and ekusa kuron en kilikiai onta, from Xenophon. He heard that Cyrus was in Cilicia, literally being in Cilicia. Notice that onta agrees with kuron there. Now, the main point I want to make, and kept you a little bit over, is this. And that is, so far, you have it easy. After our primary tenses, each verb in the quotation remains in its tense and its mood. So there's no shifting of tenses and moods. You just report exactly what you heard if your reporting is introduced with a verb in primary tense. I am saying, I will say, or I have said the following, primary tense. Right, perfect. However, and this is where we're going to have to deal with this Sequence of moods again. After your historical tenses, each verb in the quotation may be changed to the optative, and it usually is. So if you're talking to people, if it says something like, he said that they did the following things, then you're going to see they did in the optative mood. And that's, again, for the sequence of moods. Right, that's literally line underneath it. Line. Okay. Grahe, grane. Guys, okay with that? Bye.